Maybe you remember this with an almost uncomfortable clarity. The house was silent. It was night. Everything had already slowed down. Lights off, doors closed, the world outside distant. And then you heard. That sound. Light. Rhythm. Family. The sound of paws walking around the house, as if he were still there, as if nothing had changed. If you've ever lost a dog, you know exactly what I'm feeling. And maybe that's why this video came to you, because there is something that no one explained to you. Something you may have felt, but were afraid to admit. Today, you will understand why these experiences happen. And more than that, you will realize that what you felt that night may have a much greater meaning than you imagine. It's not about fear. It's about bonding. It's about presence. And maybe about reunion. Now tell me, honestly, have you ever woken up in the middle of the night feeling like he was still there? There are people who report exactly the same. It doesn't matter the house. It doesn't matter the city. It doesn't matter how much time has passed. The pattern repeats itself. First, the silence. Then, the sound. Pause on the floor. Sometimes near the door. Sometimes in the hallway. Sometimes right next to the bed. And the strangest thing isn't the sound. It's what comes with it. A feeling impossible to explain. As if your body recognizes something before your mind accepts it. As if a part of you said, "He is here." And here comes the doubt. Was it all in my head? Was it just nostalgia? Am I imagining things? But let me tell you something important now. Direct, without beating around the bush. You are not alone in this, and most importantly, you may not be imagining it. There is a connection between you and your dog that didn't end on the last day. And maybe I couldn't even finish it. Because some relationships are not just physical, they are emotional, and some are even deeper. Maybe you still remember the way he walked around the house, from the specific sound of his paws. Every dog has a rhythm, a unique presence, and your body learned this, recorded this, felt that way for years. So when that sound appears again, even if it's subtle, even if it's fast, even if you doubt it, a part of you recognizes it immediately. And that changes everything. Because it's not just any sound. It is a sound that carries memory, load link, load story. And there is something that almost no one talks about. These moments happen most when you are vulnerable, at night, in the silence, when the mind slows down, and the heart becomes more open. This is exactly where some presences can be felt, not with the eyes, but with something deeper. And maybe that's why it impacted you so much. Because it wasn't just a noise, it was a complete sensation, as if for a few seconds, he had returned. One person commented something that never left my mind. She said it like this: "I swear I heard my dog walking down the hallway, and for a second, I didn't feel sadness. I felt relief." Look what that means. Even after the loss, even after the silence, there is still a meeting of sorts going on, even if brief, even if subtle. And that raises a possibility that could change the way you see everything. What if that moment, wasn't it imagination? What if it was a visit? In the next moment, I'll show you why so many people report exactly the same thing, and what happens inside us when the house is silent, but it looks like someone is still there. After a dog leaves, the house doesn't just change on the outside, she changes inside, change the sound, change the rhythm. It even changes the way time seems to pass. Because before, there was life circulating through the rooms, a small or large body crossing the corridor, a look following your steps, a calm breath in some corner of the room, and suddenly, it all disappears. It just doesn't disappear completely. This is the point that most confuses those who are experiencing grief, because the absence is real. But so is the feeling of presence. And living with these two things at the same time affects us deeply. Maybe you've already felt this in the place where he slept. The bed is still there, or maybe it's not even there anymore. But the space is still charged. You look at that corner and feel like something is missing. It's not just an object that came out. It's an energy that was part of the entire house, as if that place still kept his shape, as if the void had learned to have his name. And this happens in the most common things, when it's time to wake up, when opening the door, when walking to the kitchen, in moments when, out of habit, you still wait for him to appear. This is one of the most painful details of homesickness. The body takes longer to accept than the mind. The mind knows, but the body is still waiting. Expect to hear him coming when you get the key. Wait to see him get up when you move a bag. Expect to feel that presence following you around the house, even on the quietest days. And that's why so many people suffer in silence. Because it's not a loud pain. It's a pain made up of details, of small absences repeated every day. The water pot that no longer needs to be filled. The time he used to wait for you. The corner of the house that was too quiet. The moment you walk in, and for a second, still look at the place where it always was. If you've been through this, you know that grieving for a dog is not a small one. He gets into the routine. It enters the air of the house. He comes in during breaks. And perhaps the most difficult thing is precisely this. Almost no one sees it. But you feel it, all the time. One person said that for weeks after her dog left, she couldn't move anything. The blanket remained folded in the same way. The little pot was still in the corner, and every night, before going to sleep, she looked at the bedroom door with the strange feeling that he was still going to enter. Not because she was stuck in the past, but because deep down, some part of her still felt that that bond hadn't been severed. This touches a lot of people because it is human. When a dog lives with you for many years, he doesn't just take up space. It takes up memory. It enters your schedules, your reflexes, your most automatic emotions. He knows when you arrive, knows when you are sad. You know when something isn't going well, and you also learn to live with this presence. So when he leaves, the house isn't just emptier. She is left without a language that previously existed every day. Without that familiar sound. Without that company that didn't need words. Without that silent look that seemed to understand everything. And that's where an experience begins that many people don't talk about for fear of seeming exaggerated. At times, the silence in the house becomes strange, not empty. Strange. As if silence wasn't a total absence. As if he was carrying something, a living memory, an invisible continuation, a presence too slight to be seen but too familiar to ignore. Maybe this has already happened to you. You pass a room and feel the urge to look down, like you did before. You open the door, and for a second you almost expect him to be there. You find yourself straying from the place where he used to lay, even though you know there's no one there. These small gestures say a lot, because they show that love does not disappear along with the body. It continues to act within you. Keep organizing your memory. Keep leaving signs in the simple things of the day. And maybe that's why certain nights weigh more. Because during the day, distraction helps. But at night, when everything slows down, the emotional truth comes out more powerfully. The house speaks. Silence speaks. Longing speaks. And in some cases, it seems like something else is also speaking. Not with words, but with sensation, with living memory, with that kind of presence that arrives slowly and touches exactly where the pain still lives. There is a difference between remembering and feeling. Remembering is thinking about him. Feeling it is almost realizing that he still passed by. And anyone who has experienced this knows how difficult it is to explain. Because it doesn't seem like fantasy. It feels like intimacy. It looks like continuity. It feels like part of the bond trying to say, I still know where you are. This type of experience does not erase the pain, but its weight changes. because longing is no longer just a rupture. It also starts to look like a bridge. And that matters a lot, especially for those who blame themselves for still feeling so much, especially for those who look at the house in silence and think they need to get over it quickly. Not all true love leaves the environment quickly. Not every deep bond ends with the last breath. Some stay, some echo. Some continue to inhabit the places where there has been care, loyalty, and presence for so long. And maybe that's exactly what you started to realize. Not logically, but in an intimate way, in the way the house was different, in the way certain corners seemed to hold more than just memories, in the way that silence, at times, almost seems like a warning that absence is not as absolute as it seems. There are people who try to ignore this. There are people who rationalize everything. But there are times when the heart recognizes before any explanation. And when that happens, the question is no longer just, why am I feeling this? The question becomes another, deeper, more delicate, harder to forget. And if the house was silent, but not completely, what still stays with you? In the next block, we enter into precisely this feeling that many people know, but almost never have the courage to say out loud. That impression that, even after leaving, he still follows you around the house. There's something that happens to many owners after a dog leaves, and it almost always happens within most common scenes of the day. You get up to drink water, go to the kitchen, go through the hallway, and for a moment he feels exactly what he felt before, like he's coming after you. It is not imagination in the form of thought. It's faster than that. It's almost physical, a short, automatic, intimate perception, as if the body still recognized a company there. And this deeply affects those who live, because following the owner around the house is one of the most common memories between humans and dogs. He followed you without making a sound sometimes. Other times, he would come slowly, just to lie down close by. In many homes, this has become part of the routine without the person realizing it. Going to the bathroom with someone waiting at the door, reaching into a bag and hearing paws approaching, sitting on the sofa and, a few seconds later, feeling that presence occupying the floor next to you. These scenes seem small, but they are precisely the ones that leave deeper marks. Because true love almost never lives only in great moments. He lives in everyday life, on repeat, in constant presence, in the way someone shares a house with you until they transform silence into company. Maybe that's why, after he leaves, certain sensations continue to appear so strongly. You fold some clothes and almost look down. You change rooms and feel like waiting. You stop for a second because some part of you swore you weren't alone. And the most touching thing about all this is that these experiences don't usually come at great moments. They appear while you make coffee, while turning off the light in the room, while making the bed, while walking around the house the same way as always. It's as if the bond chose precisely the places where life really happened, not to scare, but to remember. Remember that there was a presence there so faithful, so constant, so full of love, that the entire house learned to feel together with you. One woman said that, after losing her dog, she continued to make room with her legs in the kitchen without realizing it. It was an old gesture. He always lay very close while she prepared the food. For weeks, she still repeated this automatic movement, until the day he stopped in the middle of the kitchen and cried. Not because I was trapped, but because he understood that certain habits are, in fact, living forms of love. The body keeps what the soul experienced intensely. And that's why some presences don't disappear all at once. First, they come out of the eyes. Then, little by little, they try to get out of the routine. But they don't always succeed, because there was something between you that was already part of your way of existing within the house. Your dog wasn't just an animal living with you. He was a witness of his days. He saw you in good, bad, tired, silent moments. He accompanied you without demanding an explanation. He followed you not because he needed to know where you were going, but because, for him, Being close was already destiny. And maybe that's what makes this feeling so strong after parting. Because the bond of following and being followed was not just physical, it was emotional, it was energetic. It was a love language built on the repetition of simple things. So when you feel that he is still behind you in the hallway, that feeling is filled with recognition. It doesn't seem like an invention. It seems like living memory. It looks like a continuation. It looks like something trying to survive the visible end. And along with that, there is another memory that comes back with force. The door. How many times did he know the moment you arrived? How many times did he seem to feel your presence even before the sound of the key? Some dogs were running, others just looked up. Others were already waiting in the same place as always, as if their watch was made of bond. This image is recorded. Therefore, after he leaves, entering the house can become one of the most delicate moments of the day, because for a second, you still wait. Not because you forgot, but because love creates expectations even where logic no longer reaches. You open the door and feel the emptiness coming in front. But sometimes, along with this emptiness comes something else. A quick impression, an impulse to look at the corner where he appeared, a feeling of invisible reception, as if some part of him still recognized your arrival. And this finds another memory impossible to erase: the look. Anyone who has lived with a dog for years knows that there is a type of look that cannot be explained. It wasn't just attention, it wasn't just custom, it was an emotional presence. It was as if he understood more than he should have, as if he noticed his mood, his weight, his silence. That look didn't speak, but it followed, and perhaps that's why it continues to be felt even afterwards. Because there are bonds that don't end on the last day. They continue to appear in the form of a remembered gesture, a sudden sensation, an intimacy that insists. Here comes something important. When these experiences start to happen, many people try to nip them in the bud. Tell yourself it's just habito, just longing, just reflection. And yes, habit and nostalgia are part of it, but they don't always explain everything. Because there's a difference between repeating an old routine and feeling, for a real moment, that there's someone there with you. It is precisely in this difference that the mystery lies, and perhaps also hope. Because the bond between a human and their dog is not built just through coexistence. It is built by silent loyalty, by constant presence, by an emotional exchange so pure that it even leaves marks on the way you walk around the house. You don't remember him only when you want to. Sometimes the house itself does the remembering for you. The runner remembers, the door remembers, the sofa remembers, the floor remembers. And on certain nights or certain moments of the day, all of this seems to come together in a single sensation. He still knows how to find you. Now, pay attention to this. There are people who say they felt this presence precisely on the most difficult days, when they were tired, when they cried in secret, when they felt too alone. As if the dog, which in life already knew exactly when to approach, continued to recognize the same signals even after leaving. This idea hits home because it doesn't seem impossible for anyone who has experienced this bond. On the contrary, it seems consistent with everything he already did. He already followed you when you were well. I used to lie close when you were feeling bad. I already noticed things that no one else noticed. So why would it be so absurd to think that this care could have left an echo? Maybe the question isn't whether you felt anything strange. Perhaps the question is, why does this feeling appear just when your heart needs comfort the most? This changes the weight of the experience, because it's no longer just an automatic memory. It starts to seem like a form of presence. Subtle, yes. Silent, yes. But deeply familiar. And when familiarity touches pain, something inside you begins to change. You no longer just look at absence. Start noticing signs within the routine, small but intense details. Invisible movements that are not easily explained, but that also do not seem empty. And this is where everything starts to get deeper, because feeling that he still follows you is already strong. But there are times when this stops being just a sensation, and it almost feels like a date. In the next block, we enter the night when something really changes. That moment when the heart realizes that it wasn't just a memory. There is a very big difference between remembering and feeling like something actually happened. Up until now, everything could still seem like nostalgia, habit, memory. The kind of reflex that remains when someone was too important to get out of the routine quickly. But for many people, there comes a night when that changes. An ordinary night. Nothing special, no expectations, without any attempt to feel anything. And perhaps that's precisely why it makes such an impact, because it happens in the middle of normal, in the middle of real life. You finish the day, save a cup, turn off the kitchen light, check the door, go to the room, lay down, and try to rest. But the body is still awake. The mind slows down little by little. The house enters that deepest silence that seems to increase every little noise. And then it comes. Not a memory, not a thought, something more direct. A short noise in the hallway, a light touch on the floor, the clear impression of movement near the door, or that impossible to explain feeling, as if someone had just entered the room. It is at this moment that the heart changes rhythm, because longing may hurt, but it is usually recognizable. Not that. It takes you by surprise. This has presence, and when an experience has presence, it moves a very deep part of us. Many people report the same sequence. First, try to ignore it. He thinks it was the wood from the house, the wind, some noise. But seconds later comes the second wave, the feeling, thin, subtle, but very clear, as if the environment had become different, as if there was company there, not visible, not concrete like before, but familiar enough to make your eyes search in the dark. One person said that, months after her dog left, she woke up in the middle of the night with the same feeling she had for years, that he was next to her bed, waiting for her to move and then lie down again, she said as she opened her eyes slowly, not having the courage to look right away. Because for a second, he didn't feel afraid. He felt recognition, as if the body knew before the mind, as if that moment wasn't strange. It was intimate. This hits home because this is exactly how many describe it, not as scared, but as a sudden reunion, short, silent, difficult to prove, but too strong to be treated as nothing. And the most remarkable thing is that these moments almost always happen when the pain is quieter, not necessarily on the most desperate day. Sometimes it happens later, when he has already moved on with his life, when the outside of the house is back to normal, when only you know that there is still a void at certain times. It's as if the experience comes when the noise of the world diminishes enough for you to realize what is still alive within the bond. And this creates a very human conflict, because a part of you wants to believe, but another part is afraid to believe. You want to embrace that moment, but you also want to protect yourself from the possibility that you are confusing longing with presence. This conflict is painful, because it's not just rational doubt. It's a clash between what you felt and what you think you are allowed to feel. Many people have been taught to discredit their own emotional perception, calling everything exaggerated, reducing profound experiences to things in the head. But there are nights when that's not enough. There are nights when what you feel has too much weight to fit into this explanation. You remember the way he walked, the time between one step and another, from the exact spot where he used to stop, his habit of approaching you when he realized you weren't feeling well, and suddenly, something that night seems to repeat exactly that language, not equal to any noise, just like him. That's what moves. The recognition, emotional precision. The fact that it doesn't feel generic feels. It seems like a presence with history. Maybe that's why so many people cry afterwards. Not at the moment. After. when they realize what they felt, when they sit on the bed, when they look into the dark room, when they put their hand on the sheet and understand that, for a few seconds, the absence lost strength. Because something broke through that silence, something touched the memory in the most vivid way possible. And here, there is a very important detail. Almost no one would invent this kind of thing for themselves at the worst moment of grief, because the grief is already too heavy. What happens, most of the time, is the opposite. The person tries to convince themselves that it was nothing. Try to go back to sleep. Try thinking about something else. Try to organize the experience so as not to be disappointed. But she stays, the next day, the following week, sometimes for years. Not as a scary scene, but as a night that opened a door within him. A night that gave rise to the feeling that the end might not be as closed as it seems. And that changes everything, because until then, the loss seemed to be heading in only one direction. He's gone. The house was empty. The memories remained. But after a night like this, another possibility arises, small at first, almost shy. What if the relationship has not been completely interrupted? What if there is still a form of closeness that no longer depends on the body? This idea is not born as a theory. It is born as an experience. That's why she's so strong. You're not trying to invent meaning. You are trying to understand something you really felt. Something that entered your room without opening the door. Something that touched your perception without making enough noise to convince someone else. Something that, precisely because it is so intimate, seems to have been made just for you. Perhaps this is one of the deepest parts of this type of bond. The dog in life already communicated with you in a way that not everyone realized. In the look, on approach, when it's time to lie down close, in the silent insistence of following your movements. It was communication without speech, no elaborate logic, no proof needed. Maybe that's why, when something happens after the match, the language remains similar. Subtle, silent, straight to the heart. Some people feel a light weight at the foot of the bed. There are those who hear the sound of the collar that is no longer there. There are those who notice a quick movement in the corner of the room and for a second don't doubt it. The most important thing is not the exact format. It is the emotional coherence of the experience. It seems to come from the same presence that once organized the house with loyalty, habit, and love. And when the experience seems consistent with who he was, the pain takes on a new layer. It continues to be pain. But now it's mixed with something that didn't exist before. Hope. Not a naive hope. Not an escape from reality. A delicate hope. Almost whispered. The hope that the bond has perhaps found another way to remain. And this is precisely where this topic becomes impossible to ignore. Because if that night something really changed, then what you felt wasn't just longing trying to survive. It may have been a sign of continuity. It may have been a brief touch from a presence that still recognizes you. It might have been the quietest way of saying, I still know where you are. And that leads to a question that many people try to avoid, but that comes back with a vengeance after a night like this. If he already knew how to find you in life, why wouldn't he keep trying now? In the next block, we enter the most delicate and transformative point of all, when you start to realize that maybe you weren't imagining it. There comes a time when trying to loving everything coincidentally no longer calms down. Because coincidence explains a detail, explains a loose noise, explains a reflex, but it doesn't explain the depth of certain experiences. It doesn't explain why some sensations arrive with such emotional precision. It doesn't explain why, instead of fear, what you feel is recognition. And this is the most delicate point of this entire path, because when you start to admit that maybe you're not imagining it, something changes inside you. It's not just about what happened that night. It's about how you start to look at the bond that existed between you. For a long time, many people were taught to think of the love of animals as something beautiful, but limited, as if it were a passing companion, as if the depth of that connection ended with the body. But anyone who has actually lived with a dog knows that it wasn't just company. It was harmony. It was silent reading. It was a constant presence. It was such an intimate exchange that often he noticed you before you noticed yourself. Your dog knew when you were sad without anyone saying anything. I knew when you were coming home. He knew when to get closer and when to just stay close in silence. This is not a shallow connection. That's deep bonding. And deep bonds don't just disappear. They leave marks on memory, on the body, on habits. And for many people, they leave something even greater, a feeling of continuity. There is even a human explanation for some of this. The brain records patterns of presence, records sounds, routines, movements, schedules, paths inside the house. It also records the emotional comfort that came with this coexistence. Therefore, after a loss, certain memories become extremely vivid. This is real. It happens. But here's the point that a lot of people feel and can almost never put into words. Not all experience seems to come only from memory, because memory remembers. But sometimes, what happens seems to answer. And there is a huge difference between remembering someone's presence and feeling deep in your chest that some presence has just touched you. Perhaps you have already experienced this in a very simple way. A difficult day, a full head, the tight heart. And out of nowhere comes that calm feeling, as if something familiar had touched the environment, as if for an instant the air changed, as if a part of you, which was disorganized, was silently welcomed. In these moments, the person almost always recognizes the emotional signature of it, because each dog loved differently. Some protected, some followed, some watched in silence, some seemed to bring peace just by being around. And when the sensation that arises carries exactly that same type of presence, it's difficult to reduce everything to a cold mechanism. One person said that they were crying while sitting on the floor of their room on one of those days when homesickness weighs more than usual. Without saying anything, without asking for anything, she felt that same calm that the dog brought when he leaned close to her in bad moments. There was no sound. There was no image. But there was the same peace. And that's what took it apart. Because it didn't seem like a memory produced by the mind. He seemed careful. This type of story is repeated in different ways, but with the same emotional core. People don't describe spectacle. They describe intimacy. They don't talk about something great. They talk about a presence that arrives the same way the dog arrived in life, without attracting attention, but changing everything around it. That's why this experience is so touching, because she respects who he was. Your dog didn't need to speak to be understood. It didn't need to be explained to make sense. His love already worked in the language of silence. So perhaps it is not strange that, after the departure, any continuity of this bond also comes in silence. And perhaps this is precisely when many people begin to relax their resistance, not to indulge in fantasy, but to allow an emotional truth that the heart has been whispering for a long time. Some bonds don't end when the body leaves. They change shape. They no longer occupy visible space, but they continue to find ways to touch the lives of those who remain. This idea need not be treated as an exaggeration, much less as a weakness. In fact, there is something very mature about recognizing that love leaves deep traces, that coexistence builds a connection that goes beyond the automatic, that there are relationships so loyal, so constant, and so full of presence that it would be strange to expect them to disappear without leaving any echo. And this is where a phrase that you might need to hear comes in today. When a dog truly loves you, he doesn't disappear from your life. He changes the way he stays. Keep that sentence. Because she doesn't just talk about longing, she talks about continuity. It speaks of a bond that cannot be erased easily because it was built every day, in the details simpler, with a purity that few human relationships achieve. And maybe that's why certain experiences feel so clean inside. They don't bring confusion, they bring recognition. They don't bring weight, they bring a kind of comfort, even when they make you cry. In fact, it's important to say this: crying in these moments does not mean that the experience was weak. Sometimes it means exactly the opposite. It means something touched a very deep place. A place where pain and love still live together. A place where absence continues to hurt, but no longer seems absolute. This is the most transformative internal conflict of all. On the one hand, logic trying to protect you from disappointment. On the other, the heart recognizing something that doesn't seem empty. And the more you remember who he was, the more this possibility gains strength. Because he always found you, in the hallway, at the door, in the kitchen, on happy days, on heavy days, in the moments when no one else noticed your pain. So why would the idea that he's still trying to get closer seem absurd if everything in your story was about getting closer? Perhaps the biggest problem is not believing. Maybe it's realizing that believing changes everything. Change the way you feel loss. Change the way you remember home. Change the way you look at those silent nights. Because when you admit that maybe you're not imagining it, grief is no longer just about separation. He begins to also become listening. Listening for subtle signals, listening to living memory. You hear a presence that no longer runs around the house like before, but still knows how to reach you in some way. And this inner change is powerful, because it returns meaning where before there was only emptiness. It doesn't take away the longing, it doesn't erase the lack, but it transforms pain into something less closed, less final, less dead-end. If this has ever happened to you, perhaps you now understand why this feeling has returned so many times. Maybe it wasn't his mind trying to deny the match. Maybe it was the bond trying to remember that true love doesn't fall apart at the moment of goodbye. And that prepares the heart for the deepest part of all. Because if you're not imagining, so there is a question that can no longer be avoided. What if he never really left? In the next block, we enter exactly this possibility, the most intimate, the most spiritual, and for many people, the most consoling of all. This is the most intimate part of this entire path. Because up until now, perhaps you have recognized yourself in the memories, in the sensations, in the small signs, in the nights when something seemed different. But now the question gets deeper, quieter, more impossible to ignore. What if he never really left? Not in the physical sense. You know there was a goodbye. You know there was a last day. He knows that there is a concrete absence in the house, in the routine, in the place where he slept, in the sound that stopped happening the old way. But perhaps the match didn't end everything. Maybe it ended just one form of presence. And this completely changes the way we look at this bond. Because when a dog really comes into your life, he doesn't just take up space. He enters your emotional field. He learns his steps, learn your silences, learn the difference between your tiredness and your sadness. Learn when you want to play and when you just need company. It is a connection built without masks, no interest, no calculation, just presence, just loyalty, just love repeated in such simple gestures that precisely for this reason become eternal within us. Perhaps this is why the idea of spiritual continuity makes so much sense to anyone who has deeply loved a dog. Because this bond never felt ordinary. It never felt superficial. There was something there that went beyond the routine. Something that seemed old, as if he had arrived in your life already knowing where he belonged. As if he recognized you before he even understood your voice. As if it had a silent mission to accompany you in an important part of your history. Many people describe this without using spiritual words. They just say, "It seemed like he understood me. It seemed like he showed up at the right time. It seemed like he knew when I needed it most." And perhaps that says it all. Because there are encounters that don't seem like an accident. There are bonds that don't seem temporary. There are presences that carry a type of familiarity that does not match the idea of chance. And when this connection was so strong in life, perhaps it is not an exaggeration to think that she continues to seek paths after death, not like before, not with visible steps every day, but in subtle ways, in moments of pain, on the heaviest days, on nights when you feel more than you can explain. Maybe what continues is not the body. Perhaps it is the essence of presence, that part of him that always knew how to find you, that part that recognized your energy before your voice. That part that seemed to be guided not by the clock, but by the bond. And this brings comfort for a very profound reason. If the bond was of the soul, then death does not destroy that bond. At most, it transforms. Maybe that's why some dogs seem to come back precisely at decisive moments. When you're about to collapse, when the longing presses in a different way, when the loneliness of the house becomes heavier than usual, as if there was a brief permission, a subtle approach. A touch that doesn't want to prove anything to the world, just reach those who need to feel it. One person said that, on the hardest day of the year since her dog left, she sat on the couch where he used to lie at her feet. The house was quiet. There was no music. There was no television. And suddenly, the same feeling came from years ago, that of not being alone in that room. She said she didn't see anything, but he also said he recognized it right away, because the peace he felt had a name. This is too strong, because it shows that certain presences continue to be perceived for the effect they have within us, not always by sound, not always by movement, sometimes because of what they reorganize in their hearts. Your dog may have been that in life, a presence that rearranged you, that calmed down without speech, that lessened the weight of a bad day just by being close. So it makes sense that, if he still finds ways to get closer, the mark left will be similar. Peace, reception, recognition, a kind of closeness that doesn't need to be seen to be felt. And here comes a reflection that can change the way you keep this story. Maybe you didn't just lose one pet. Perhaps you have experienced a soul encounter. Maybe he wasn't just with you to share days. Perhaps it was there to teach presence, loyalty, silent love, and even longing itself. Perhaps his role in your life was so profound that it would not fit entirely within a single earthly passage. This does not erase the grief, but it illuminates the mourning. It gives it greater meaning. It transforms the pain of "it's over" into a more lively question. In what way is he still with me? Do you see how this changes everything? You stop looking only at the lack and begin to observe the echoes, the moments when the memory comes too hot, the nights when the silence seems full, the moments in which the feeling of presence arises with a delicacy that is impossible to force. Maybe these are not empty coincidences. Maybe they are forms of continuity. Maybe they are subtle ways for a very pure bond to say it still exists. And it hits home because no one has loved you the way a dog loves you, without measuring, without complicating it, no backing down when you were at your worst. This type of love leaves spiritual marks, not just emotional, spiritual, because it crosses the surface of life and settles in a deeper place where time does not erase easily. Maybe that's why certain goodbyes don't seem final, because history doesn't close within logic. She continues breathing into her heart, and there is a question that perhaps only you can answer, in silence, after everything you have felt so far. When the house was quiet, when the night was heavy, when a familiar presence reached you, was it just longing, or was it him finding a way to come back to you? Many people will spend their lives trying to solve this with just their mind, but there are things that the mind cannot contain. Only the bond explains it. Only intimate experience clarifies this. Only the heart recognizes. And perhaps this recognition is what matters most. Because in the end, what consoles you is not having proof. It's about realizing coherence. It's feeling like that matches who he was. It matches the way he took care. It matches the way he always knew when to get close. It matches the loyalty he showed until his last day. And when it combines so much, hope stops seeming naive. It begins to look like spiritual memory, the memory of a love that refused to disappear completely. Now, keep this with care. Sometimes, what you call longing is also the continuation of a bond looking for passage. And maybe that's why some nights aren't empty. Maybe they are visitors. Perhaps these will be brief reunions. Maybe they are the quietest form of love that still keeps trying to touch you. In the next and final block, all of this returns to the memory of the beginning, that sound, that night, that feeling that there was someone there, only now, with a much greater meaning. Now go back with me to the beginning. The house in silence. The night stops, the dark hallway. And suddenly, that sound, the pause, light, known. Impossible to confuse for those who have listened for so long. At first, maybe it just seemed like pain, just longing, just a memory crossing the dawn. But after everything we've seen so far, maybe you can look at that night differently. Maybe you don't have. It was just a loose memory. Maybe it was a date, brief, silent, but real in what matters most, in what it made you feel. Because there are experiences that don't have to be long to change everything. Just a moment, a familiar sound, a presence that touches the environment in the same way it touched your routine, a sudden calm in the midst of sadness, and the heart understands before the mind can explain. Maybe that's why some nights are marked forever, not because they were scary, but because they seemed to open a gap. A small opening between nostalgia and continuity, between absence and presence, between what ended in the matter and what perhaps continues in the bond. Your dog wasn't just part of the house. He was part of you. The way you walked in the door, the way he walked to the kitchen, the way he felt accompanied without needing to say anything. He was in the details, in the sound of pause, in the place where he slept, in the way I followed you without asking for anything, in the silent look that seemed to understand even what you were hiding. And when a love enters so deeply into our lives, perhaps it doesn't disappear dryly. Maybe it will continue to echo. Maybe he continues to look for discreet ways to exist. Maybe it keeps coming when the world gets quiet enough for you to notice. This does not mean living stuck in the past. It means recognizing the depth of a bond. It means accepting that there are relationships so pure, so loyal, and so full of presence, that the physical end cannot completely erase the impression they leave on the emotional and spiritual world of those who stayed. Maybe you spent a lot of time trying to convince yourself that you needed to stop feeling, stop listening, stop noticing, stop believing. But deep down, perhaps what hurt most wasn't the longing. Maybe it was the feeling of having experienced something true and not having the space to admit it. Today, this space exists, and it starts with a simple truth. The bond between you and your dog was not small. It wasn't trivial. It wasn't just a beautiful phase of his life. It was a story of the soul, built on everyday life, loyalty, and presence. And stories like this don't end in a common way. They leave signs, they leave echoes, they leave nights that we never forget. Maybe that night was one of those. The night you realized, even though you couldn't put it into words, that there was still something between you. Not like before, but still alive, still sensitive, still able to touch you. And this even changes the way we remember the last day. Because the last day is no longer just about closing. It becomes the last time you saw it with your eyes, not necessarily the last time you felt it. This difference is profound, because it gives back hope without denying the pain. The longing continues. The emptiness of the house continues at certain moments. The place where he slept can still squeeze his chest. Silence can still hurt. But now there is a higher possibility, that the love that existed there did not end. It just changed its language. This is the most delicate spiritual hope of all. Not the hope of forgetting, nor the hope of not suffering anymore, but the hope is that the bond will continue to find new paths. May the presence continue to visit. That, on some level, that perhaps reason cannot fully reach, he still knows how to reach you. And maybe that's why some people feel comfort precisely when the house seems emptier. Because sometimes the void is not completely empty. Sometimes it is full of living memory, full of accumulated love, full of a subtle presence that doesn't push, doesn't scare, doesn't demand. Just pull over. Just remember, it just remains. If this video touched you, maybe it's because a part of you already knew that. Maybe you just needed to hear out loud that what you felt wasn't absurd. That the sound that came in the night was not small. That the feeling in the hallway, in the room, at the door, in the silence of the house, may have been more than just longing trying to survive. It may have been love trying to carry on. And I want to invite you to do something very intimate now. If you've ever felt your dog's presence after he left, write here in the comments, "I felt like he came back." This phrase may seem simple, but it helps other people realize that they are not alone. And if you want, tell us how it was. Was it a sound? Was it a sensation? Was it a dream so real that it felt like a visit? Was it that place in the house where he always stayed? There are a lot of people carrying this in silence. And when someone has the courage to tell, someone else feels relief at finally recognizing themselves. And there's one more thing. If, deep in your heart, you believe that the bond with your dog continues beyond this life, also write, "His love still finds me." Because this is not just a comment. It's a statement. It's a form of honor, a bond that was true. It's a way of saying that your relationship had meaning. And that's how lonely pain starts to become belonging. Before you finish, save this final image. On any given night, the house is silent. You stop for a second and hear what no one else would hear in the same way, because only those who loved recognize it. Only those who have lived with it know how to differentiate. Only those who have shared their entire lives with a dog understand that certain sounds are not just sounds. They are memories with presence. They are echoes with identity. They are small touches of a love that refuses to be reduced to the past. So maybe that night wasn't a mistake. Maybe, that night, while the whole world slept, your dog was just doing what he always did, trying to find you.